This is Paul Pearson, host of Star Time. And when I'm not being reprimanded by traffic cops, I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio World.
Do you have an idea for a community project in your neighborhood? You could be eligible for up to $50,000 in funding through the City of Seattle's Neighborhood Matching Fund. Grants are awarded to grassroots projects that build stronger communities, with an emphasis on projects led by impacting Black, Indigenous, and people of color BIPOC communities. To learn more about the Neighborhood Matching Fund or to see if your project meets the criteria, visit seattle.gov/neighborhoods/NMF.
Kind of nonsense conversation are we having here?
The Neon Ghost Show. The Neon Ghost Show. Right here on Rainier what's it? Rainier Avenue Radio .world.
Right about now.
Rainier Avenue Radio .world. I'm so tired. I have to pee.
On Rainier Avenue Radio .world, look for the Change Your Food, Change Your Life show. I'm Dennis Weaver, your good food guide and host, helping you to feel good and look good, and who wouldn't want some of that? All that and more from the Change Your Food, Change Your Life show on Rainier Avenue Radio .world. Stories, songs, and guests. Begin living the organic good food life, and the rest of your life just may be the best of your life. Always up, baby, to your help.
Generational wealth. Generational wealth. Generational wealth. What is generational wealth? We asked our communities, and this is what they had to say.
When I think about generational wealth, I think about history. I think about the history of exploitation, of what led us to today. Some people live a certain socioeconomic way, and the majority does not get to live in that same way. Perhaps they don't want to live that way. I don't know.
Generational wealth has some really strong positives and some really strong negatives. At its best, it's ways that communities can grow, find security for themselves. It's a way to make sure that your children and their children and each generation thereafter has opportunities to find joy and growth and make a difference in the world.
This campaign to create awareness to generational wealth is brought to you by the Department of Neighborhood's Generational Wealth Initiative, the Washington Housing Finance Commission, and Rainier Avenue Radio .world.
You are listening to Rainier Avenue Radio .world. Don't forget to log on www.rainieravenue.world.
Well, that's that theme song. My favorite artist, John Coltrane, Love Supreme. Welcome. We are in another edition or another show of Seattle Here and Now on February. This is February 9th. This is the second week of the celebration in the month of February of Black History, African American History Month. And you know, if you stayed tuned to us last week, you'll know that it was the brainchild of Carter G. Woodson, an amazing man. It's just, look him up, check him out. Really poignant saying and stuff he was saying about why it was important to chronicle the achievements of African Americans, Black Americans. So Carter G. Woodson, folks. So anyways, I have a very special guest, somebody I've known for quite a few years. I've always looked up to him. He's much older than me. So, you have to give your elders a lot of grace and everything. But he and I are considered colleagues and friends. We've done, basically generally in the same sphere of work. He worked for many years at the city of Bellevue, but he also does some great work, and which we're going to share. But this is Kevin P. Henry, and he's been in this, I guess you could say, issue of race and social justice and equity for over 3 decades. Like I said, he's much older than me. He worked as a consultant, speaker, diversity trainer, writer, and facilitator in DEI. And for those of you who have been living in another universe or in a cave somewhere, DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Kevin I consider him an expert, and many people consider him an expert in the area, in the field of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. He's done it for nonprofits, companies, corporation, public entities like City of Bellevue, etc. And he's traveled all around, and he's even spent some time in Honolulu surfing. I guess I don't know if he surfs, but I just said that. He also has been a journalist and host of All the Way Authentic, which is a podcast. We don't say podcast, we're a multimedia hub or whatever. And he's a contributor to KBCS FM 91.3, which is KBCS. And I work for Bellevue Community College, and that's their radio station, doing public affairs programming. And he also writes for several publications. He does training currently in DEI. He has clients all over the country, and he does training in listen to this, including unconscious bias. Wow, that's interesting. Microaggressions every day, and how to have these difficult conversations about race and culture. And you know what I've said, folks, this country does not like to talk about race because of three things: slavery, the genocide they committed against the Native American, Indian, indigenous population, and how they treat immigrants. And for over the last couple of years, he's delivered DEI training and is responsible, it says, for community outreach for sound mental health. And man, do we need it. This has been some trying. This will be considered, this time period is one of the most stressful in this country. He also worked for like I said, the city of Bellevue for several years, doing public forums, culture events, and that's how I ran into him. And I was working at the state level as well as at the federal level, DOJ. And he, he's also a freelance writer, producer, and does articles. He's also been he also is a board member of Organization for Prostitution Survivors, and is a member of the Northwest Rotary to End Sex Trafficking. And believe it or not, this Pacific Northwest is considered a hub for sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. We talk about that. We may get into it. But he's also serving on the Health Education Committee for the Seattle-King County branch of the NAACP. Next week, I'm going to have the president, newly elected president, L. Darrell Powell, to come in and talk about the NAACP. But hey, today's show, we're going to have Kevin P. Henry. And I don't know, Kevin, as long as I've known you, what does the P stand for? Wow, anyways, we'll get into that. But it is my pleasure to bring in a very, very good friend of mine, a very distinguished individual, Kevin P. Henry. Come on in, Kevin.
Hey, now you know what? I want to see your birth certificate, because you keep making these jokes about how I'm older than you are, and I think that the birth certificate would show otherwise.
Well, okay, man. See, I see you cut your hair because you didn't want to show all that gray that was in it the last time I saw it.
I dyed it. And the Botox is working too tonight as well.
Oh man, Kevin, you're something else. Yeah, that's why I love you, man. You have such a great sense of humor on some serious subjects that we're going to be talking about.
You have to have a sense of humor. You got to laugh.
I know.
Crying sometimes.
And as when you were at the city of Bellevue, all those issues, the police community, all that stuff that was going on. But no, Cabrini Hospital in Southside Chicago, May 1, 1948. So I am older than you.
Oh my! Well, you look good for your age, I must say.
Yeah, I don't feel good, but that's another story.
Well, but you look good. It's not how you feel; it's how you look. I think. Yeah. What's that guy used to say? That Billy Crystal, I think.
Yeah, you look marvelous. But no, thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you have. You and I stay in touch with each other, but the time has come. This is Black History Month, African American History Month, but in light of what's been going on, all these issues, we talked about critical race theory and this movement to dismantle Black history, but all of that stuff. And now you come with a very acute time dealing with diversity, equity, inclusion. And I got to be honest. Had we lived by that credo, diversity, equity, inclusion, we wouldn't even be talking about MAGA and their incursions, voter suppression, all of these things. I think, well, I know you agree, and I agree, but I really have to respect the work you're doing, because you talk about unconscious bias, you talk about white privilege, you talk about those things. That's a very difficult conversation. So let's get into it. First of all, share with us, if you don't mind, a little bit about yourself, where you're born, schools you attend, that kind of thing, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm happy to. So I grew up in Los Angeles near Hollywood, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. But I pretty much grew up I remember when Martin Luther King was assassinated. I was, and the interesting thing about my life was I was in this little bubble in Los Angeles. We lived in an integrated neighborhood, middle-class neighborhood, and all of this just hate and hell was happening outside of my bubble. So I remember when Martin Luther King was shot, my parents, turned on the TV and I saw cops with water hoses and buildings burning and all this. And I literally thought I was watching a movie. I'm just a little kid at that point. And Robert F. Kennedy got killed at the Ambassador Hotel about 3 miles from my house.
In LA, right.
Yeah, in LA. And I remember when Malcolm X got killed, except I was so small, I had no idea who that was, but I just knew my parents were upset about it. I was fortunate that I did grow up in an integrated environment. My school was actually heavily Jewish, which I think it kept my mind open. I think I was surrounded by a lot of people who either were very racist, who might have been white, or I was surrounded by some of my relatives who were into Huey Newton and the Black Panthers, telling me, don't trust any white person. But fortunately, I interacted with enough diverse people that I think it kept my mind open. So I didn't fall prey to a lot of my own racism, I think.
Well, that's interesting because Watts, man, that was on the headlines. I'm working at Boeing and I'm working with these people. They're saying, well, they need to kill them all, shoot them all, all those ends rioting. And I said, what?
Yeah.
I went to my lead man at Boeing. I said, Dale, did she's talking. And he says, I know he says she's got a problem. And you know what I found out? She was born and raised in those ethnic communities, one of those ethnic communities in North Dakota, heavily German, and she spoke German. And it was practically like, you live in the United States, but you might as well say you're a German citizen. And it's real. And Dale, the white dude, my lead guy, he said, man, she's crazy and all that stuff, because he was married to a Latino sister, brown skinned sister. So he said, man, I hear you, John. But that's the length. And this was in when was
65, I think.
Yeah, 65, 65.
Yeah.
Man, and look where we are today.
Well, I wanted to say that when I was at Sound Health, it was during Black History Month a couple of years ago, and I had 2 photographs. I had a photograph of a Black Lives Matter protest march, and then I had a photo of a civil rights march, and they were almost identical. And I said, this is how far we haven't come, that we're still having to go out into the streets and bring a spotlight to the same old, brutality, racism, hate, that kind of thing.
Yeah, Kevin, that's very poignant. Protest. Well, it's the same thing that Frederick Douglass says when he was asked by a young African-American young man who was completely, he said, what should I do, Mr. Douglass? He says, agitate, because even back then, post-Civil War, things, again, Jim Crow, etc., these are the kinds of things. So when you talk about your upbringing, and I asked you that question, I kind of threw some questions at you at the beginning. This is not something that you just want to do. I mean, hey, I want to be a mechanic. I want to be a carpenter. I want to be this. You don't get up and say, hey, man, I want to be a diversity, equity, and inclusion trainer as a profession, and I'm going to go to school to prepare myself. And people say, you're nuts. You should get a trade or something, or, something that's worthwhile.
Yeah, I think that like a lot of people who have a passion for something, whether it be music, it could be the arts, it could be science, at a very early age, I was affected by what I saw and felt, where it was a lot of emotional pain that was directly related to people mistreating me in some cases, or other people based solely on the color of their skin. And I think I said, if anything, I can't get rid of that emotional thing that's happening inside of me. So I need to do something with it. So I became a journalist initially. And then I was also being fed by a lot of, this is the late 60s, early 70s, Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, Stevie Wonder was doing things. A lot of the music was reflecting and reinforcing that need to want to go do something. So it just stuck with me and it never left.
Well, that's good because you were brought up in a family that paid attention to this stuff. And, it's much easier to just turn off the TV and, just ignore it. But you can't because it's your life. You have to live it every day. I mean, yeah, this is Black History Month. This is African American History Month. But brother, you're Black or African 365 days a year, 24/7, that kind of thing. And, that's kind of trite, but people don't understand. There is a different circumstance when you are a person of color in this country. And I will be honest, especially if you are an African American, because there is that issue of what is the panoply between Africans who come from Africa to live in this country, and what about African Americans who are descendants of slaves? That institution, the most heinous institution, African Americans Holocaust, Jewish Holocaust, and I did a presentation about the Japanese Holocaust, the incarceration of Japanese,
the Native American, the attempted genocide, same basis.
Yeah. And so, more power to you. You were letting the real world color you and guide you in that way. So, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, people say, "Oh, I know what diversity means. I know what inclusion means." But why not equality? I said, no. My argument is, I want to hear yours.
Yeah.
Hell no. Equality doesn't mean nothing. Equity means everything because that means fairness. That's
exactly. And a lot of people, I'm glad you brought up the question because equality, for me, this is my own definition, and other people will share this in general, is that equality means, for me, equal access. It means that, I can go into a Bank of America and open a checking account, or I can go vote. Now, somebody else might open a checking account and they put $1,000 in it, and I only have $10 to put in it. So it's equal. I have that equal access.
Right.
But in terms of equity, it's just like house equity. We can have two houses that look identical, and one can be bought and paid for, and the other you could be underwater in. But it's the two identical houses. What I also like to compare it to is, I work a lot with mental health practitioners, for instance, and it is very, very difficult if you're a person of color to find a mental health counselor or psychiatrist of color.
Exactly.
Even though I have insurance, I have that equal access, right? But the effects of a person of color who's a mental health counselor is going to have a more equitable. He's going to be able to, or she's going to be able to focus on what I really need based on the fact that we come from the same racial background.
And that's interesting. You make that. I'm glad you made that point because a friend of mine wrote his thesis on the disclosure and the apparent inadequacies of a disclosure when African Americans have white counselors or therapists, that they are very reluctant to open up because of the issue of the racial element. And that's, well, you're saying the same thing. It ramps into the same thing. It's a little bit more profound when you're talking about, I'm going into therapy. My therapist is white, but I can't talk to him or her. And really,
it's not their fault, but again, it's not an equitable situation. Yeah, really. And the other thing, I just wanted to add something, John, is that a lot of, and this feeds into the whole equity thing, is that a lot of people feel like, hey, once the slaves were freed, everything was good. Once we passed certain laws, that desegregated the schools, then we don't need to do anymore. Just because people follow a new set of rules doesn't mean they don't have the same mindset as they had before.
I know. Yeah, I'm glad you bring that because I did cover Brown versus Board, and I did cover Little Rock 9. I did talk about Field Order 15, which was, and I just mentioned that again. I did a lecture at the South Seattle Community College and told the students to look up Field Order 15. That was the 400,000 acres that Sherman took away from the South when he went in his march to the sea And so we're going to give them back to the slaves. We're going to let them have it, that kind of thing. It got nixed. It got signed by Lincoln, but it got nixed by Johnson after Lincoln was assassinated. And that was that term, 40 acres and a mule. And we're talking about parts of South Carolina, offshore islands, 30 miles inland, all the way through Georgia, all the way to the St. John River, which is in Florida. And I had to throw that in, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but see, again, the issue of equity, and we talked, and you mentioned it. It's that element of fair. Equality means, okay, you and I may apply for the same job. Yeah, that's equal, as you say, equal access. But how does our application get treated?
Well, exactly. And there's been that data that I'm sure you're familiar with about ethnic sounding last names.
Yes.
And, even some of my job has been working with clients to totally rewrite and revamp their application process or how they describe a job, because they're writing that and producing that through their own lens.
Yeah, right. A very narrow lens.
Yeah.
It's real interesting. And but like I said, so in the years you've been doing, has it been getting easier? Is it getting harder? Is it kind of par for the course, or what? Because we're having a new generation. They say this younger generation, supposedly, because of social media and integration and everything, is supposedly less biased, less racist. I don't know that.
I would not say that. I would say that in some ways it's gotten easier, in the sense that I do think that people, and I'm predominantly talking about white people, are more open to the idea of reevaluating themselves and looking inside themselves to really try and be better people and be more inclusive and more equitable. However, as you know, certain states, certain entities, certain groups of people are really trying to discredit, diminish, erase a lot of history, because they don't want to really look at how the past is connected to what's happening in the present. They want this kind of sanitized version of, America is this great country, and wave the flag and all, and not look at all the ugliness that also is part of that history as well. So there's quite a bit of pushback. There's fear, a lot of gaslighting, a lot of people who say, well, hey, John, I'm just colorblind. Everybody's just the same to me. I said, well, it's easy for you to be colorblind because you don't have to worry about the same things that we have to worry about. And as far as, just to add on to the response, in terms of the young people being the next generation, yes, I'm encouraged sometimes. But when I get on the internet and I hear about 3 college students who are painting or spray painting one of their white classmates black and spouting out the N-word and mocking Black history, these are college students, and this is part of our future, right? I'm very discouraged by that.
That's interesting. And I just read about, I get the EEOC report, and they said they're taking to task this Domino's franchisee up in New York, who the company, not Domino's, but the franchise company, allowed the managers and supervisors to call the employees the N-word.
And I haven't even seen that one yet.
You go in. I know you get that EEOC, and using the NIA at the end, like the slang version. And when they stepped forward to complain, they were threatened. One manager got a scissors and stuck it in the face of one of the African American employees. EEOC jumped on that with both feet. It's on the front. It's on the front of their report. And then, of course, Richard Jones, our good brother Richard Jones, Quincy's younger brother, Judge Richard Jones, Western District Court, just sentenced these guys for assaulting an African American DJ up in Linwood. So yeah. You saw that. I know you saw.
And this is just the things that we hear about. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's probably that we hasn't.
Yeah, and this is over in our corner of the world, Pacific Northwest. And so, what you do is very important. What we can do is very important. People say, "Well, you can't change people's minds and how they." I understand that, but the more we get on board with it, the more I think companies, from the president on down to the chairman or chairwoman of the board, say this is the way it's going to be, folks. If you don't like it, hey, we love you. Go find another career or another place to work. But this is the way it's going to be. And I think you're the one that has to light that fire. And I know you've been doing it for several years. So what is the worst? I've had situations where I had to go before. I think it was like a couple of hundred people and talk about employment law and regulations and what you can ask in an employment application form. What's disclosed? What's called pre-employment inquiries. Man, this was in Eastern Washington. Yeah. This guy jumps up and he says, I got 20 stores. You mean to tell me I can't ask these people what kind of conviction they had, blah, 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 even if it happened 40 years ago? I said, no, sir. The pre-employment inquiry. How come I can't ask them if they're going to get married? I said, no, sir, you can't. I mean, seriously, there are people, and this was several years ago, but again, there are still elements of people that still think like that. And you know that, Kevin. So how do you reach them? I mean, you've had difficult training sessions. I know you have.
Right.
Yeah. So how do you do it? If I could add, I mean, I don't want the insider secrets, but
Well, yeah. I mean, I've been, knock on wood. I haven't had too many of those like really, really intense confrontations or anything like that. I have had people that are in kind of gaslight mode, where they're saying, well, John, you're over exaggerating all this. And if people would just stop talking about race, we wouldn't have racism. And I said, well, yeah, let's stop talking about cancer and maybe that'll go away too, right?
That's a good point.
And a couple of different things that I will try. Sometimes I will try and really listen to the person because I, for one thing, really want to try and understand, not that I agree with them, really where they're coming from.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's from some lived experience that they've had which has tainted their way of thinking. And then because of the bubble that they live in, like out on the farm somewhere with no interaction with people of color, they just kind of cling to this one stereotype of those people, So I will challenge it in the sense that I try and provide them with information, because what I find is that a lot of times people who are saying ignorant things have very, very little information. They'll take one thing Candace Owens said or something, and they just run with that, And so I will try and show them in a nice way. Well, you said A, but I'm going to show you B, C, and D, which contradicts A, and just leave it there, because I think that it takes time for people to really change. Just like it took 40, 50 years for them to get that way, one diversity training for an hour isn't going to change. But if I can at least get them to feel like, hey, I think I'm going to check out what he said, and then follow that up with action, because just like the bus boycott, it wasn't until I think that bus company after Rosa Parks, did her thing. It wasn't until that bus company faced bankruptcy, I believe, because that they said, well, maybe we should let the Black people sit in the front of the bus or where they want to sit. So, and then I think gradually they probably said, well, okay, maybe I could reevaluate this, because I have seen people change. I've seen skinheads turn into diversity trainers. It is possible.
Man, that is full circle. That is very interesting. That would be a story in a book in and of itself. Let me ask you this. Like I said, I asked earlier on, you learned these things, but was there any one person or anyone that influenced you into taking, the path that you've taken? Was it a parent? Was it that kind of thing? I like people to share that.
Sure. Well, I had great parents. They were wonderful people, and I think they were extremely great role models for me, for one thing. And they grew up, they could have been different, because my dad was born in 1920. He was part of segregated troops in World War II. He was called names. He went to fight for a country and defend the country and came back so he could be treated like a second-class citizen or worse. But he kept his openness to people, and he judged people as individuals, which really kind of stuck with me, as well as my mom. I think other influences were probably Malcolm X. I liked what he said, especially about being independent and self-sufficient and not depending on others necessarily. Martin Luther King, of course, even Robert F. Kennedy, was somebody who I felt I was so even as a little boy, I was so upset when he was killed.
Yeah.
And I would say some of the musicians, some of the artists that you know, I was reading recently about how you know, you get the Temptations and the Supremes and these people who when you're growing up watching them, you're thinking what glamorous lives. But then you hear stories as an adult where you know, the Klan was after them. They had to sleep in these rundown motels on the black side of town, and so the trailblazers. Those are the people that I like, John Lewis and people like
John
that.
Lewis,
that paved the way for us.
That's beautiful. We're going to take a break real quick, but I did want to mention Nat King Cole talked about being assaulted when he went down south as a great, and one of the greatest, I still consider him the greatest singer of all time, assaulted because he's a black man in a nightclub setting. It's just insane. But hey, my guest, and very good friend, Kevin P. Henry. I didn't ask him what the P stands for, but I won't.
The P is for persistent.
All right, got you,
It's
man.
It's Paul.
It's Paul. Okay, that's very good. Well, I should have been John Paul. I never had a middle name. My very special guest, one of the foremost experts in the area of DEI, good friend of mine. We're going to be right back, and we're going to talk more about all the kinds of things that are going on, DEI included, and again, reflections on his experiences and to share with the audience. You're listening to Seattle Here and Now and watching Seattle Here and Now on Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
This is Paul Pearson, host of Star Time. And when I'm not translating the lyrics of Boogie Oogie Oogie for bored Europeans, I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Celebrate Black History Month at the Call to Conscience Black History Month Museum, formerly Columbia City Theater, 4916 Rainier Avenue South. Call to Conscience Black History Month Museum features exhibits and installations. It's a guided tour. Installations include the Seattle Black Panther Party, the Black Heritage Society of Washington, the Rainier Cinema Black Movie Jimi Hendrix Family Installation, the Seattle Griot Project, BlackPass.org, the Hartsfield Family Slave, the Seattle Black Firefighters, an exhibit of the Seattle Black Elected Officials, Tacoma's Buffalo Soldiers Museum, Keith Flywright Williams Photography Collection, the Royal Esquires, a Negro League baseball display featuring the Seattle Steelheads. Of course, there will be your community keepsakes and memorabilia. Tuesdays through Sundays from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. There will be no other location where you can celebrate the achievements and the achievers of the Pacific Northwest and Seattle while recognizing the Black excellence that shines today. For more information, visit RainierAvenueRadio.world or call 206-290-9685.
Women are not an homogenous group.
We face discrimination differently depending on factors such as ethnicity, age, socioeconomic status, and more.
Rainier Avenue Radio is proud to amplify women's voices.
They are the experts of their own lives, initiating conversations within their community about challenges they face, the solutions they're working on, and the opportunities they see.
Please join us this Sunday from 2 to 5 for Women's Voices on Air. We know our challenges. We are the experts of our lives.
We are master multitaskers, prioritizing our family, friends, and our faith above our own needs.
Our needs and voices are too often overlooked.
Please join us this Sunday from 2 to 5 p.m. for Women's Voices on Air.
We tell our stories in our own way.
This is Brenda Charles Edwards, host of Seniors Matter. Join me every week to get information on activities and issues that impact the lives of older adults and their families. That's Seniors Matter every week on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Are you a small business owner in Seattle who was impacted by COVID-19? The Seattle Office of Economic Development is investing $8 million to connect small businesses to operating capital. The Small Business Capital Access Program will lower the cost of Washington State Small Business Flex Fund loans by paying down 25% of the loan principal. Eligible small businesses can borrow up to $150,000 with a 4% interest rate to cover expenses like payroll, rent, utilities, and supplies.
You are listening to Rainier Avenue Radio,
your community radio station.
Alrighty, we are back. Come on back, Kev.
All right.
Kevin. We take a short break. I didn't tell you we take that short break. Usually I run to the men's room or something like that or get something to drink or whatever. You know, I told you that.
I think that's too much information, John.
feed my dog or whatever.
We didn't need to know all that.
Okay, man. Okay, and I can't erase it because this is live and this will be recorded on YouTube. You saw the site, so I'm really proud of what we're doing. We got like 90 shows. We do many live shows. This is live. You've been on the air. You've been on radio.
Yeah, well, I remember Tony B. I remember Tony B. at KJR, I think, FM, like a long time ago.
Yeah, he's much older than us. He's older than you.
Is.
Thank you. Oh, and we're doing a Black History Month Call to Conscience here at the Rainier, the Columbia City Theater. We own it now.
Oh,
and
good.
so I gotta get you to come. I gotta get you to come down.
Yeah.
Whenever you come on in the neighborhood, let me know. We'll go to breakfast, lunch, or whatever. But it's at the Rainier. It's on. Again, 4916 Rainier Avenue South. It's the Columbia City Theater. Call to Conscience. It's now from February 1st all the way to the end of the month. And Tuesdays to Sundays, 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. There's a small, entry charge. But hey, there's a bunch of displays, amazing stuff. Buffalo Soldiers from Tacoma, Esquire Club, all of these things that you've been knowledgeable about. I think you'd like it, and I'm going to go down there and visit. But on top of all of the things we're doing, also doing high school basketball, blah blah blah. So we talked about in the framework of DEI. Most people say, okay, employment. Okay, we're an employer. We can, and I've always looked at employers as opposed to government a little bit easier to make a little shift and do the kinds of things because. Let's be honest, promoting diversity and inclusion, if it broadens there and builds up their bottom line, they're going to do it. What's going to create more profit? That kind of thing. We're going to reach a bigger audience and have them buy our products or whatever. But when we talk about education, and we talked about that, it's a totally different landscape because I'm going to give you the figures. I looked at the data from the University of Washington. There's been a decline in the number of African-American students enrolled. Asian students enrolled, Native American, American Indian, because all those programs, EOP programs, they are gone. They did away with them, I-200. Well, now hopefully it's coming back with the governor's executive order. But look at how much damage has been done. 20 years of not being able to do it. And the one group that has been able to maintain and expand are foreign students. And so that means foreign students are basically, I don't want to say it in a very negative way, but they're taking places for our American and native-born kids of all the groups. And that's a fact. I looked at the data. And that's why you have groups, and I'll be honest, I'll share this with the East Side. There's a large Chinese population, nationals, who are against affirmative action because they feel threatened that their students, their kids will not be, embraced in terms of enrollment. And so we've got that internecine issue, intraracial ethnic conflict, because we're saying, we're looking at the numbers. And you come, and I got to be honest, you come to this country from wherever country you come from, you don't know what the African-American, the Black individuals who were born here and raised here and their generations before had to go through. The lynchings, Black Wall Street, right? Tulsa, Oklahoma, Rosewood, all of these things, lynchings, all of this stuff. Native American genocide, a wounded knee, all of these things. Japanese American incarceration, the yellow peril, all that stuff. See, that's the thing. And what happened to Zootsuit riots? Hell, if you're a Latino man, Mexican American man, walk the streets of LA, you get your butt kicked. Zootsuit riots of the 1940s, and it was based on the fact that these military guys, a lot of them from San Diego, especially Navy, they saw a Latino guy and they said they're going after our white girls, and that's what started it. Several of them were killed. But anyways,
fear. A lot of times the fear I just feel is at the root. It's just like those. Every once in a while, I'll look at this photograph of, I think it was Ruby Bridges. They escorted into the school, and then they have these photos of these just enraged white people that you would think somebody was trying to kill them. And then you see this little Black girl just trying to go to school.
Carrying her books, minding her own business.
Just the terror in these people's eyes and the rage. And I'm thinking, what is that about?
Yeah, I have to be honest. I don't want to dehumanize people, but they look like beasts. They look like rabid animals, man.
Well, they completely lost their minds,
Yeah.
but I still see some of that today. I mean,
Yeah.
like you're talking. You mentioned several things that were, part of the past of indigenous people and black people and all that, but a lot of that attitude is still here today. You still have these white supremacist group. I just read something about the power grid. That whole power.
Oh
grid
yeah, man.
situation with the white supremacists are behind that, and they had possibly had a plot to, Well, there you go.
Yeah, exactly. They were talking to the mother of the young woman they arrested, and she was bought off into that white supremacy hate group. My understanding is she even had terminal cancer, but she said, I'm with you to blow up these power stations or whatever. That's the ultimate insanity. But January 6th told us how far these people are willing to go.
The Buffalo murders, the Charleston 9. I mean, this is all recent.
Yeah, this is all recent. And the offshoot of it is, we're looking at, the killings in California. These guys got guns. See, again, the issue of guns with people who have an issue and a axe to grind, it's not a good combination. So anyway, so you've been doing the training. You do your broadcast. I know you've been doing writing and things like that.
Right.
In terms of education, are we, I've asked around, and I work for the school district. Not convinced that we do an adequate job of talking about the contributions of all the groups, even the white Europeans, that contributed to this country. But you got to understand, the president of Harvard University comes on the TV and says, "Look, we got to do something about the fact." This was a few years ago. That all we do is teach about a bunch of dead white men, white European men, and white men. We got to do something about the history. We got to do something that's more relevant. And I said, wow, that's really interesting. But anyways, you were going to make a comment. Go ahead. I mean,
I was just saying that when I hear what you just said, and then I talk to certain groups that, want the very kind of short, brief, little diversity talk for 20 minutes. There's this real check the box mentality. Of like, it's Black History Month. Let's roll out the usual 6 or 7 people, that we do every year. We'll have a breakfast, and we'll have an entertainer come, and then we're done. Like a flu shot. Now we're good for the whole year. We don't have to deal with this anymore till next year. But what attitude?
What about the treatment of the Black employees of color? How many are being promoted? How many are being disciplined unfairly? How all of these,
the microaggressions. The microaggression. In fact, I've worked for some companies. One, I won't name who it was, but I was responsible for doing about 25 to 30 exit interviews, offboarding, so to speak.
Mm-hmm,
and I would say at least 95% of the people, it wasn't the job, it wasn't the pay. They were leaving because of the manager, their coworkers, the fact that they felt like they didn't have a voice. Wow. They felt like microaggressions were not addressed. And they said, and they were gaslit, and they said, hey, I'm leaving. I mean, look at Tesla.
Yeah.
That, right? $13 million or whatever. And it's been going, and you talk about Domino's, where they're putting up with employees supervisors calling Black people the N-word in the workplace.
Yeah. That.
I guess they got to lose a lot of money in court.
But, again, as we say, and you've done sexual harassment training. If you're a manager, supervisor, and you're involved with directing and managing and supervising a workforce, you're in a position to know, and you need to know what the heck is going on. And if you're a part of that problem, then you're going to take it. You're going to take it on the chin or in other parts of your anatomy. And that's the responsibility. So we look at education. I'm going back to education because why is it? I mean, we know the research says if I am a student, you and I are sitting in a classroom and we see somebody that looks like us up there teaching, there's an automatic affinity for us. And to me, it sparks something that my wanting to learn. Just like, and they know this is a fact. The research shows that. But why are we falling so short? Is it?
I don't know. I mean, it's like, I think it's something on this whole separate show we could probably do and have some people.
I know. Maybe. Is it the credentialing issue? I'll give you an example, and this is a personal one. I'm going to personalize it. I can't get a job teaching at any college, even though I've got 40 years experience, because I don't have a master's degree.
Good point.
Yeah. They say, well, you don't have a master's. I've written law. I've written regulations for the state of Washington. I worked for 2 governors that impacted over 200,000 employees. Affirmative action, that, and when I was with the Human Rights Commission. Well, but you don't have a master's degree. What is a master's degree going to allow me to do if I talk to somebody about Title VII or Title VI or Title IX, 504, 88 disability law, just like we know you can cite the mantra too, stuff that you already know. But like I said, how does it fit? And the other thing is the application is very practical when you talk in terms of, and you've been in the human resources field too. These things are issues of compliance that if you don't follow them, if you don't do the things you do, you're going to get into trouble, right? Because and I know you dealt with one of the issues that came up with Bellevue Police Department was a lack of diversity. And yeah, I know that was one of the issues that came up. And same way with King County Sheriff. Seattle Police Department did a big recruiting job, but when you look at the outlying areas, and there has been a change, I got to say that there's been more positive change at Bellevue, but it takes an issue, it takes a controversy, it takes something happening.
Right.
So how do you address that? How can you help an employer or an educational institution do what they need to do to get more faculty involved, more, hired, etc., or more employees? What is your approach, Kevin?
Well, I usually try kind of degrees of intensity, I guess. I mean, I always try to sit down and talk to people and show them proof, show them data, show them comparisons. I mean, I've worked a little bit with law enforcement, and sometimes I have seen certain police departments will start to reconsider their policies or their recruitment strategies based on another city's approach. So if you can use case studies to kind of prove your point, I would try that. I would also try media attention. I think that when you wind up on the news at 5 o'clock trying to explain this, it might motivate you to make it a priority, because now it's not just this little internal thing, it's all over the county. So I tried different approaches. I kind of bump it up again. Some people need to have their feet to the fire, some people need to, but I think that you always have to back it up with data. You got to keep the emotion out of it, because people will use that and say, oh, well, John, you're just emotional. You're just one of those, left wing, emotional,
Yeah, I know. Exactly.
Woke people kind of thing. And then I think you also need to get allies.
Yeah.
You need to get people who, let's face it, sometimes when white people are speaking to other white people, it carries more weight, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because they go, well, if my white colleague feels this way, I expect that from the people of color. But now I've got the president of Harvard or something saying something.
Exactly.
And they pay attention. So that's what I would try.
Well, that's a good point. Before we get before we go, no, I want you to get your commercial break. How do they contact? If I want to hire Kevin P. Henry, a DEI guru and specialist and expert, who do I contact and how do I contact?
We have a 24-hour diversity hotline. No, I'm just kidding. It's at kevinphenry.com.
Got you.
Just go to the website. You can send me an email, and it comes right to me, and I can respond.
Very good.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Have not have gun, but have information will travel. Not have gun, but whatever. Well, maybe you carry gun. Yeah. Okay. Give it again.
KevinPHenry.com.
That you got it. KevinPHenry.com. So, anyways. Kevin Paul Henry. I love that, Paul, because like I said, I tried to get and this is kind of tacky, but I tried to get myself a middle name. I was always enamored by a guy named John David Crow, who played football for the St. Louis Cardinals. And I wonder, I know before you tell, well, I was born in Chicago. My dad used to take us to the Chicago Cardinals versus the Chicago Bears games in the late Well, early 50s
Wow.
when we were kids. Oh yeah, that they used to, the Phoenix, Arizona Cardinals used to be in Chicago. Then they moved to St. Louis. Then they moved to Phoenix. Oh yeah, so that's old. But anyways, so what do you see? Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion? Because all of that is such a broad framework. We're talking about non-discrimination. We're talking about civil rights. We're talking about all of these things. And embracing everybody, LGBTQ, the persons of age, disabilities, all that stuff. What do you see on the horizon, or as I say, the light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, depending on what day it is, sometimes I feel really optimistic because I feel like a lot of the crazy responses, the ignorant statements that are made on TV or that I see on the internet from so-called leaders from, certain sections of the country, I feel like they feel like they're losing, and they're getting desperate because some of the stuff is so absurd and ridiculous. You go, is that the best you can come up with? Some of the stuff, there were a bunch of tourists on January 6th, at the Capitol. So I feel like, okay, they're obviously throwing a lot of Hail Marys here. Now, on the other hand, I get a little discouraged sometimes. I really feel that there's got to be a special emphasis on the future generation, the young people, because they're going to, a lot of these people, just like the people in the South, the old rednecks in the South, they died off and they were replaced by more enlightened people. And so by the time you got to the 70s and the 80s, you still had racism, but it wasn't as pervasive as it was in the 30s or 40s. So I think that engaging young people, educating them, getting them involved, but also listening to them as well, because there's a lot of polarization right now. So I think people really need to start coming together, and sometimes you got to force people to do it. Sometimes it's got to be contingent on your employment that you do certain things, and eventually you'll get on board. But sometimes you need that push.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, you need leverage. I mean, that's a fact. People will do what they need to do to protect themselves or to preserve their jobs, blah, blah, blah. If you're just asking people to do it for out of the goodwill of their heart,
Some people will, but I think most people won't.
No.
Because for one thing, there's a lack of empathy in the sense that, your story, you can tell a white person, for instance, your story, and they'll go, oh yeah, well, that's bad. They still don't empathize with it because they haven't walked in our shoes.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? So unless they're really pushed into something or they see some horrible, blatant act of racism, they let a lot of things just slide by.
Yeah. Well, I did a presentation, and this is a sad one. I talked about I covered the lynchings from as far as it was recorded time, and there's an estimate that maybe 6,000 to 8,000 or more African Americans or persons of African American descent, Black Americans, were lynched during that period, and we're only able to collate the information that was available, and I don't think 6,000 even comes close. And the other thing that people don't understand is that these are learned behaviors. Hate, discrimination, all of that is learned behavior. And like I said, I love the piece that you do about education, because that's the only way we can buttress ourselves against all the negative stuff, all the things, the misinformation, as they say, disinformation, misinformation, is through education. And we need to bolster curricula that stresses not African American Heritage Month, Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month, but the contributions of people of different races and ethnicities along a continuum, not just on a month, that kind of thing.
Right, exactly.
And it's almost like what you're saying. It's a continuous process, and we need to do it. But I'll be much chagrined if I could see a school district anywhere in the state of Washington, including Seattle, that does this consistently, that has it amongst their curricula to do these kinds of things. And there are elements of it, but they got criticized when they talk about, remember, the what's called uncomfortable conversations or whatever they did, they had to pull that back. Many of the
Oh yeah,
white
I mean, there's Shoreline was doing, city of Shoreline was doing, I think, like a Black Lives Matter week or
right
something, and they were doing a lot of very deep digging into, structural racism and that kind of
bias and all, yeah,
bias
right.
and that
I
kind of
remember.
stuff. And there's a lot
Yeah.
of people critical of it but at least they're doing it. I think
Yeah.
it's a positive sign.
No, that's right, and that's great because Shoreline's an interesting place. I was going to Shoreline College, but they came out with a policy that only people who lived in Shoreline could go to Shoreline Community College. Bless his heart, the Attorney General at the time, under Dan Evans, said, "No, hold it. This is a public institution.
Right.
Anybody can go here." Can you imagine?
That's weird.
When you look at the population of Shoreline, it was 100% white.
Yeah.
And we were going there to play football, of course, get exploited that way, but that's another story. And you know the story because you've seen it and grew up with it. But so diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to have it. Again, businesses seem to be much more attuned to bringing it in because I believe it affects their bottom line. When I was in Atlanta, I saw more commercials of every major product in the world with, guess what? People of color buying it, selling it. I mean, compared to up here in the Pacific Northwest. And I'm sure in certain markets, I mean, in LA, I mean, you would see, it's just real interesting because they understand.
The color of green.
Overrides all the other colors.
Yeah, exactly.
So like I said, you've been doing this for many years. And I'm going to ask you to be very, very candid. Has it made a difference? Do you think it's making a difference? Do you think we need to continue?
I think we need to continue. I think it has made a difference.
Yeah.
It not as much of a difference as I'd like, but I think it has. I mean, I have seen some individual changes. I've seen some companies change. I've seen organizations change. It's been a slow, arduous process. But I have seen, I think, I'd like to see it continue. And right now, you look on Indeed or job boards, you see a lot of DEI positions out there. And 10 years ago, you didn't see that. So at least some people are getting it.
Well, I look at all the job announcements that come out of the city of Seattle, and they say must be attuned to race and social justice issues, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And state of Washington has an equity, diversity, equity. And so, no, Kevin, your contribution has been well warranted and well received. But we need many more people. Hell,
more allies too.
Yeah. I'd love to get my master's degree in diversity, equity, and inclusion. A master's degree in that. How long did it take for us to get a degree in ethnic studies? Yeah.
I don't know. You tell me.
75, 100 years, something like that. Something like that. I'm seriously. The only school.
It was a long time. That's even worse than I thought.
No. The first school they actually did was University of California. They had an ethnic studies degree. In your home state. Berkeley, yeah, UC Berkeley. And then you look across the country and you say, well, if this is so important, we got math, science, engineering, medicine, etc. But being able to live in a world that's diverse, because in 20, 30 years, this country is going to be very diverse. The majority of the people. It's going to flip-flop. It's going to be people of color or biracial or multiracial. So it's coming, folks. So again, I think it's a very good point you make. Kevin P. Henry, my friend, my colleague, and an expert, and I say expert, and how I mean it, and I mean an expert, teaches, writes, does training. Contact him if you are in the need to get good training, because I was at that facilitation you did over in Bellevue with and a number of the people there were Eastern Europeans.
Oh, okay. A lot of Eastern Europeans over there in Bellevue. Yeah.
And I said, well, and Kevin's gonna pull this off. More power to you. You had about, I don't know how many Ukrainians, Serbo-Croatians, Russians. Oh my God, it was really interesting. I thought it was there. I was there. I saw Faye Brooks there. That was.
Yeah, I talk to her all the time. She's great.
Yeah. And so, like, they were talking about the whole issue. So anyway, Kevin, keep doing what you're doing, man. And like I said, I want to bring you back.
Sure. Or if you need any help finding somebody else, I know a lot of people can speak to a lot of these topics.
Well, I know you, and I feel comfortable with you. And and you can send the check, and the check send the check in the mail. I'm just kidding. All right. Hey, if you want to get in touch with him, Kevin, give him the point of contact for you.
It's
please.
Kevin P. Henry, kevinphenry.com.
Folks, check him out. The guy knows everything from soup to nuts, everything in the area of defining, diversity, equity.
I'm still learning though. Hey, it's an adventure.
Hey, oh wow. Hey, you know what? Hey, more power to you. But hey, again, thank you very much, Kevin. I really appreciate it. This is again our second show for African American Black History Month, and I think it's right on time because the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion is right on the top of that list of things that we need to take on as the country and work with it. Deal with it, folks. That's part of life. Diversity is coming. Equity has got to be the way we live, and inclusion has got to be part of it. So again, thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Stay tuned to Metro Sports Weekly. I think it's a repeat, but anyways, Kevin, we'll be in touch. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening and watching Rainier Avenue Radio Seattle Here and Now. I'm your host, and my guest is Kevin. All right, see you next time.